Hi, everyone. I never thought I'd find myself here, sharing my life like this, but I don't know where else to turn. I've been married to Emily for 20 years. We have two kids, Hannah, who just turned 18, and Jake, who's 14. On the surface, we seemed like the perfect family. Emily has always been a fiery personality, intense, passionate, and sometimes exhausting, but I loved her for it. Or at least I thought I did. Things started to change about 6 months ago. Emily began seeing a new doctor, Dr. Stephanie Carter. Emily had been complaining about migraines for years, so it wasn't unusual for her to have regular appointments. But this time, something was different. Emily talked about Dr. Carter constantly. How professional she was, how relatable and down-to-earth she made her feel. At first, I thought it was nice that she found someone who seemed to care so much. But then, Emily started going to the doctor's office for things that didn't make sense. A sore wrist, a weird feeling in her leg. One week, she went 3 times, claiming she needed follow-ups. I chalked it up to Emily being Emily, dramatic, prone to overreaction. That's just who she was. But then there were the late-night texts. She said they were from her girls' group chat, but I'd occasionally glance at her screen, and I never saw anyone's name pop up except Dr. Carter. When I asked about it, Emily rolled her eyes and said, "It's professional advice. Stephanie is just being supportive. You should be happy I finally found someone who understands me." Still, something gnawed at me. Emily started dressing up more. Not for me, but for her appointments. She even bought new lingerie for herself, she said. I tried to tell myself I was imagining things. After all, we'd been together for so long. She loved me, right? But deep down, I knew something was wrong. I just didn't know how bad it was going to get. Stay tuned. Part 2 is when things start unraveling. The turning point came one Friday evening. Emily was supposed to pick up Jake from soccer practice, but she was over an hour late. Jake ended up calling me, and I had to leave work to grab him. When we got home, Emily was there, acting like nothing had happened. "Sorry, I got caught up," she said, brushing it off. She was still in her work clothes, but her hair looked freshly combed, and there was a faint smell of perfume I hadn't noticed earlier in the morning. "Caught up with what?" I asked, trying to keep my tone even. "Oh, just errands," she replied, turning her attention to Jake and completely ignoring my question. I didn't press further, but something felt off. Later that night, when she went to take a shower, her phone buzzed on the kitchen counter. I knew I shouldn't invade her privacy, but I couldn't stop myself. The message was from Stephanie. It said, "I can't stop thinking about today. You looked incredible. Same time next week." My stomach dropped. For a second, I told myself it could still be innocent. Maybe they were just close friends, and I was overthinking. But then I scrolled up. There were dozens of texts. Flirty, suggestive, and outright explicit. Mentions of lunches they'd had, times they'd spent together outside of appointments, and even references to places I knew Emily and I had never been. When Emily came back from her shower, I confronted her. "Who's Stephanie to you, really?" I asked, holding up her phone. The color drained from her face. "What are you doing with my phone?" She snapped, grabbing it from my hand. "Answer the question, Emily." She hesitated for a moment, then gave me this over-the-top laugh, like I was being ridiculous. "Oh my God, you're jealous? Of Stephanie? She's just a friend. We've been hanging out outside of appointments, sure, but that's it. Don't make this into something it's not." But her face said otherwise. I knew her well enough to recognize when she was lying. That night, I didn't sleep. I lay in bed next to her, listening to her breathing, trying to figure out what was happening to my wife and my marriage. Something had shifted, and I didn't know if I could fix it, or if I even wanted to. After that night, Emily changed. She became more defensive, more secretive. Her phone was suddenly glued to her hand, and she put a password on it, something she hadn't done in years. "You don't trust me anymore," she said one morning, tossing her hair as she slipped her phone into her purse. "I can't believe you're spying on me like I'm some kind of criminal." I tried to explain that it wasn't about spying, it was about honesty. But she dismissed me with that same sharp tone she used whenever she didn't want to have a real conversation. Her behavior only got worse. She started going out more, claiming she needed me time or space to think. I'd come home from work to find her gone, leaving nothing but a note saying she was at yoga or meeting a friend. But when I checked her car mileage one night out of desperation, It didn't add up. She was driving far more than a quick trip to a yoga class or coffee shop would explain. I didn't want to seem paranoid, so I tried to act normal for the kids. Hannah was busy with college applications, and Jake had enough on his plate with school and soccer. I didn't want to drag them into this mess, even though it was eating me alive. Then came the weekend. Emily told me she was heading to a women's retreat with some friends. "It's just 2 nights," she said, packing her bag with an enthusiasm that felt forced. "I need to recharge. You'll be fine with the kids, right?" I wanted to believe her. I wanted so badly to believe that I was overthinking everything. But as soon as she left, I couldn't stop myself from digging deeper. I logged on her laptop, which she'd forgotten to log out of. There were no emails or social media messages that stood out at first. But then I found an old chat backup buried in her cloud storage. It was Stephanie again. "I can't wait for our weekend together. I booked the cabin, secluded, just like you wanted. Hope you're ready to be spoiled." I felt sick. I stared at the screen for what felt like hours, trying to process what I'd just read. Emily wasn't on some innocent women's retreat. She was with her lover, sneaking away like we didn't have 2 kids and a life together. I wanted to call her, scream at her, demand answers, but I stopped myself. Instead, I started documenting everything. Screenshots of the texts, photos of her car mileage, notes on all the times she'd lied about her whereabouts. I didn't know exactly what I was going to do yet, but I knew one thing for sure. I wasn't going to let her gaslight me anymore. I couldn't get that cabin weekend out of my mind. The idea of Emily sneaking off, lying so effortlessly, and meeting with Stephanie somewhere romantic and secluded, it ate away at me. That Sunday afternoon, I decided to drive upstate. I knew the general area they might have gone to based on some hints in the messages, and by pure desperation and luck, I stumbled upon a small bed and breakfast near a wooded area. A sign down the road advertised private cabin rentals. I nearly turned back a dozen times, thinking I must be crazy, that I should respect their privacy or wait until I could confront Emily calmly. But I couldn't. My chest was tight, my stomach in knots. I needed to know what I was dealing with, needed to confirm that the woman I'd built my life around was who I feared she'd become. The cabins were tucked behind a line of trees, barely visible from the main road. I parked my car behind a thicket and walked quietly, my heart pounding in my ears. I approached carefully, sticking close to the tree line. Then I saw them. Emily and Stephanie were lounging on the small porch of a cabin, sharing a bottle of wine. Emily wore a robe I'd never seen before, silk, pale blue, and Stephanie was casually dressed in jeans and a fitted shirt. They looked so comfortable, so at ease with each other, like they'd done this 100 times. Laughter drifted through the woods. I watched as Stephanie leaned in and kissed Emily, slow and soft. My wife responded without hesitation, pulling Stephanie closer, fingers tangled in her hair. I felt sick. Anger, heartbreak, confusion, all slammed into me at once. I wanted to storm in and demand an explanation, make a scene right there on that porch. But I didn't. I didn't want to give them the satisfaction of seeing me broken. So I took photos with my phone, each snapshot a stab to my own heart, and I left as quietly as I came. On the drive home, I tried to calm myself, to think rationally. Maybe I'd confront Emily and give her one last chance to be honest. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized the woman I saw at that cabin was not the Emily I'd loved. She looked carefree, passionate, and cruel in her deception. This wasn't just a mistake or a confused fling. This was a full-blown affair, built on lies and manipulation. By the time I got home, I knew I had to prepare myself for a future without her. I held off on telling anyone, Hannah, Jake, friends, or family, because I still needed more concrete proof before I made a final decision. But my resolve was hardening by the minute. Emily returned late Sunday evening, beaming with an energy that felt sickeningly false. She breezed into the house, tossing her weekend bag onto the sofa as if she were returning from a wholesome getaway with old friends, not from a rendezvous with her lover. Her cheeks had a slight flush. Her hair was tousled in a way I recognized from more intimate times in our past, and there was a look of self-satisfaction she couldn't quite hide. "How was your weekend?" I asked, pretending to look up casually from the sports channel. I'd prepared for this moment, rehearsed it 1,000 times in my mind. "Calm," measured, observant, no immediate confrontation. "Oh, it was good," she replied, a hint of a smirk on her lips. "Lots of yoga and journaling, women's empowerment stuff. I feel so refreshed." She reached in her bag and pulled out a brochure. "See? I brought back some literature on workshops. You should be happy I'm taking care of myself." She had the audacity to sound annoyed, as if I were the one who needed convincing that self-care was noble and legitimate. I nodded slowly and flipped the channel, not really watching. "That's nice." Hannah was in her room, probably video chatting with a friend, and Jake was already asleep. I was glad the kids were out of earshot, because my heart was pounding. Despite my calm exterior, anger seethed beneath my skin. Every lie she spoke was another nail in the coffin of our marriage, and she hammered them in with ease. "So, what did you do?" she asked, leaning against the back of the couch and looking at me expectantly, as if this was just another Sunday night. "Nothing much. Took Jake to practice, helped Hannah finalize some application essays." I shrugged. Same old routine. Emily frowned slightly, as if disappointed I hadn't grilled her further, or maybe she was surprised I didn't show suspicion. But I didn't need to. Her lies fell flat in the quiet air between us. I knew what I knew. The question was, how long would I play this charade? Part of me wanted to call her out right there, show her the photos on my phone, and watch her face crumble. But I wanted more than a dramatic showdown. I wanted undeniable proof, and I wanted it at a time and place where she couldn't twist the narrative into something I'd regret. The stage had to be set properly, so there would be no escaping the truth. Once I confronted her, I wanted it to be final. She hovered for a moment, as if testing me, then sighed and wandered off to the bedroom. I heard the muffled sound of her phone buzzing, the sound of her secret life continuing just a room away. I spent the next week in a haze of quiet determination. Work was a blur, and every conversation with Emily felt like walking through a minefield. But I had a plan. If she was going to keep lying, I would force a moment of undeniable truth. I knew from her text messages, and what I glimpsed before she locked her phone, that she and Stephanie seemed to meet regularly, often near our neighborhood. I wasn't sure why they chose somewhere so close to home. Maybe the thrill of the risk excited them, or maybe they genuinely believed I was too blind to notice. Either way, it gave me an advantage. I started paying attention to her schedule again. The doctor's appointments were now just code for seeing Stephanie. Late-night coffee runs, impromptu grocery trips that took too long. All of it seemed suspicious. I needed tangible evidence, something to expose their affair without her slippery excuses. Then came a bit of luck, or fate perhaps. One evening, Emily casually mentioned that she'd be working late the following Thursday. "Conference calls and paperwork," she said, rolling her eyes. "You know how it is?" Sure, I knew how it was. She was getting bolder, less careful, as if my silence had convinced her I was clueless. I made sure to leave work early that Thursday. I told Hannah and Jake I had a late meeting, so they wouldn't worry if I came home at odd hours. Parking a few streets away, I waited in my car, eyes peeled for any sign of Emily or that damn doctor. Around 8 p.m., I saw Stephanie's car, a sleek black sedan, cruise slowly through our neighborhood. She parked 2 blocks away from our house. 10 minutes later, Emily came out, head on a swivel, making sure no one was watching. She slipped into Stephanie's passenger seat, and they pulled off, heading toward a quiet side street not far from our home. My hands shook as I followed at a safe distance, headlights off whenever possible. I felt like a detective in a bad crime drama, except this was my life, my marriage on the line. After a few turns, the car finally stopped at a dark corner near some old, vacant lots. I cut my engine and watched. Their silhouettes moved together in the front seats, and soon the windows fogged. My heart hammered in my chest. Here was my proof, raw, undeniable. It felt like stepping off a cliff, like everything I'd built was crumbling before my eyes. But I needed more. I needed to catch them right in the act, not just guess. I grabbed my phone and prepared to approach. My feet felt like lead as I eased open my car door, determined to get close enough for a damning photo or even a direct confrontation. One way or another, I would end the guessing game tonight. I approached quietly, my breathing ragged and hot in my throat. The night air was still. Streetlights barely reached this far down the block, so I had the advantage of darkness. As I got closer, I could hear muffled laughter, low voices, and the unmistakable sound of movement. If there was any doubt left in my mind, it dissolved right there. They were having sex right in Stephanie's car, not 2 blocks from my family home. I fumbled with my phone, switched on the camera, and took a few steps closer until the silhouettes inside were more than just vague shapes. In the glow of a passing car's headlights, I caught a glimpse. Emily's dark hair falling over her shoulders, Stephanie leaning into her, their bodies entwined, bare skin visible through partially discarded clothing. My stomach churned. I pressed record, my hand trembling, capturing just enough before rage overcame caution. I banged on the driver's side window. "Open the door," I snarled, my voice low and shaking. Inside, I saw them flinch and scramble, Stephanie's head jerking up, Emily trying to cover herself. The door locks clicked, but I yanked the handle before they could slip away. Emily's face, flushed and contorted with shock, peered at me over the seat. "What the hell are you doing here?" she spat, her eyes wild. I glared at her, then at Stephanie, who looked more stunned than anything else. "What am I doing here?" I asked, voice cracking with anger and disbelief. "What the hell are you doing here, Emily?" She tried to straighten her shirt, still half caught in her own lingerie. "Oh my God, you're crazy," she shrieked, eyes darting between me and Stephanie. "This isn't what it looks like." Stephanie said nothing, just reached for her keys and tried to start the engine. I grabbed the top of the door frame and leaned in, making it clear no one was going anywhere. "Don't even think about it," I warned, my voice low. Stephanie's eyes were wide, her face pale. Emily's voice was shrill as she tried to manage damage control. "She's my doctor, for God's sake. We're just talking, I swear." I let out a bitter laugh. "You think I'm that stupid? I have it on video, Emily. All the lies, all the bullshit. I know everything." At that, something in Emily snapped. She slapped the back of the driver's seat, turned wild-eyed toward me, and screamed, "If you'd been a better husband, I wouldn't have needed this. This is your fault." Her words cut through me, but they only strengthened my resolve. I stepped back, letting the cold night air fill the space between us. My hands shook, and my heart was galloping in my chest. I caught them. Finally, there would be no more denying it. At that moment, I knew our marriage was over, even if my heart hadn't fully caught up to that fact yet. The ride back home was surreal. I followed Stephanie's car at a distance, watching them pull onto our street. Emily got out, head down, eyes darting around, as if the neighbors might have heard her screams echo through the night. Stephanie didn't linger. She sped off the moment Emily slammed the passenger door shut. I watched my wife stand there for a moment on the sidewalk, adjusting her clothes, muttering curses under her breath before heading up the driveway. She looked like a stranger lost in a life she no longer recognized. I waited a few minutes to avoid another immediate confrontation, pulling into the driveway after her. Inside, the house was quiet. Hannah was upstairs, probably finishing an application essay or talking with friends. Jake had gone to bed hours ago. The warmth of our home, the scent of the dinner I'd reheated hours before, everything felt false now, like a stage set for a story that had collapsed behind the curtain. Emily stood near the dining table, arms folded, her eyes narrowed into hateful slits as I entered. She looked ready to strike, to fling more insults and wild excuses. But I didn't give her the chance. I closed the door softly, careful not to wake the kids, and fixed her with a stare that must have mirrored the devastation I felt inside. "Don't say a word," I said, voice low, barely above a whisper. "Not a single lie. You have no right to twist this anymore." She tensed, her lip curled, and for a heartbeat, I thought she might lash out. But she just shook her head. "You don't understand what it's like being married to you," she hissed, tears threatening to spill over. "I've tried to make this work. You're always so distant, so wrapped up in your own world." I almost laughed at that. Distant? I'd been distant lately because something was horribly wrong, because I felt her slipping away and didn't know how to stop it. But it was pointless to argue. The woman standing before me was no longer the Emily I married. This Emily was a practiced liar, someone who would destroy me if it meant saving face. I took a deep breath, trying not to shout, not to break every dish in the cabinet. Don't blame me. This is on you. You could have talked to me, asked for help. Instead, you cheated, you lied, over and over. And I have it all recorded. I patted my phone in my pocket, a silent promise that I wouldn't be the fool she hoped I'd be. She slammed her hand on the table, not loud enough to wake the kids, but enough to rattle a glass. You're just going to hang that over my head now? Is that it? You want to punish me? I didn't respond. I headed for the stairs, taking them two at a time. Before I reached the top, I turned back to see her standing in the dark, shoulders slumped, face twisted in frustration. I knew then that this battle would only intensify once the kids learned the truth, and I took the next inevitable steps. The next few days were hellish. I moved through the house like a ghost. Hannah and Jake noticed something was off. It was hard not to. Their mother looked hollow-eyed and tense, pacing the halls or shutting herself in the bedroom. I made excuses. Mom's stressed with work, or we're both just tired. It felt cowardly to lie to them, but I wasn't ready to shatter their world yet. Emily avoided me as much as possible. When we did cross paths, it was like staring across a battlefield. No words, just daggers in our eyes. At night, we slept in the same bed, if you could call it sleeping. I lay awake for hours, thinking about the lawyer I'd called, the papers I'd started gathering, the screenshots and photos backed up on multiple drives. Evidence, as if this were a crime scene. In a way, it was. I hadn't told Emily I was filing for divorce yet. I wanted to have everything lined up. The night I caught her with Stephanie still played in my head on an endless loop. The images of them tangled together in that car, the sound of her voice laced with venom and guilt, haunted me. There was no going back, no therapy session, no heartfelt apology that could wipe that away. One evening, as I was reviewing documents in our home office, I spotted Emily lingering by the door. She looked vulnerable, her arms crossed, lips parted in some silent plea. For a moment, I wondered if she might finally tell the truth, apologize, beg for forgiveness. Part of me still wanted some acknowledgement that she destroyed what we had. But she just sighed and walked away, leaving the silence heavy and electric. I decided I would tell the kids soon. I couldn't protect them from the truth forever. They deserved honesty, and they needed to know why their lives were about to change. The thought of sitting them down, explaining that their mother had betrayed me, and us, turned my stomach. But I knew the pain would only magnify the longer I waited. Meanwhile, Emily's phone buzzed constantly. I knew Stephanie was panicking, wondering if I'd go public, if Emily would leave her, or if I'd try to ruin Stephanie's career. I didn't care about the career part. I cared about my children, my dignity, and escaping this nightmare with as much of my soul intact as possible. Emily was smart enough not to openly fight in front of the kids now. She clung to whatever thin veneer of normalcy remained. I chose a Saturday afternoon, a rare moment when Hannah and Jake weren't absorbed in their own worlds. The clouds outside were thick, giving the living room a dim, muted quality. I turned off the television and asked them to sit down. Emily hovered in the doorway, her face set in a tense grimace. I told her I was going to talk to the kids, and she hadn't protested, just folded her arms and studied the carpet. "Dad, what's going on?" Hannah asked, tapping her fingers nervously against her knee. She was perceptive, always had been. Even Jake, who usually rolled his eyes at big family meetings, looked serious. He shifted uncomfortably, glancing between me and his mother. I cleared my throat. I'd rehearsed this speech in my head 100 times, but the words still felt heavy and unnatural on my tongue. "Listen, your mom and I, we're going through some very hard times. Things aren't working out between us, and we're going to be making some changes." Hannah's eyes widened. "Are you getting divorced?" Her voice broke slightly, and I could see fear and sadness flash across her face. Jake, 14 and all nerves, clenched his jaw. "But why?" he asked. "You guys always said you'd figure things out." His voice was smaller than usual, pulling at my heartstrings. Emily stood like a statue. It was up to me to give them something real. "Sometimes people change," I said quietly. "And sometimes they make decisions that hurt the people they love. Your mom and I hesitated, looking at Emily. She wouldn't meet my gaze. We can't stay married. It's not healthy or fair to any of us. Hannah's eyes welled with tears. How long have you known? She asked. She'd turned 18 only recently, stepping on the threshold of adulthood, and now I was slamming her with a burden she never asked for. Long enough, I admitted, trying to keep my voice steady. We both love you kids. That's not going to change. You'll always come first. I reached out a hand, but Hannah didn't move. She just stared at the coffee table, tears running silently down her cheeks. Jake pulled his hoodie sleeves over his hands and stared at the floor, blinking hard. There was a thick silence, broken only by the low hum of the fridge in the kitchen. Emily finally stepped forward, her voice thin and wavering. We never wanted to hurt you. We're sorry. She sounded forced, like she was reciting lines she didn't believe. I wanted to say more, to tell them this wasn't their fault, that their mom's choices didn't diminish how much we both cared for them, but the words stuck. At that moment, I realized no explanation would ever feel adequate. They'd have to process this in their own time. The kids withdrew. Hannah went to her room, tears glistening in her eyes. Jake trailed after her, shoulders slumped. I stood there, feeling like the worst father in the world, even though I knew this divorce was inevitable. I waited until Monday morning to contact the lawyer again. I wanted the weekend for the kids to settle, though settle wasn't really possible. Hannah barely left her room. Jake avoided eye contact, wandering around the house like a ghost. Emily oscillated between tense silence and brief bursts of forced cheerfulness, as if pretending could somehow rewrite reality. After work, I made my way to the lawyer's office, clutching a folder of evidence, text messages I'd printed out, screenshots from her laptop, even a few photos I'd taken of her and Stephanie by that cabin. It felt surreal, like I was prosecuting a criminal rather than divorcing my wife. But I needed to protect myself, and more importantly, to ensure the kids' stability. My lawyer, a steady-voiced man named Rob, sat across the desk, eyebrows raised as he shuffled through the documents. There's more than enough here, he said, voice calm and professional. I'm sorry you're going through this. We'll file for divorce on grounds of infidelity. You'll have to serve her the papers, or we can arrange to have them served by a process server. I knew Emily. If I had them served by a stranger, she'd make a scene, probably try to twist it into some narrative where I was a villain terrorizing her. So I decided to give them to her myself. I wanted to watch her face. I wanted her to see how serious I was, that this was the end of the line. That evening, after the kids had gone to their rooms, I found her in the living room, staring at the television that wasn't even on. When I entered, she looked over, annoyed, as if I'd just interrupted some grand meditation. I placed the papers on the coffee table, the clean white stack a sharp contrast to the chaos in our marriage. What's this? She asked, voice taut. Divorce papers, I said, meeting her eyes steadily. I'm done, Emily. There's no going back after what you've done. She stared at them, her face twisting between shock, disbelief, and anger. You bastard, she whispered, voice quivering. You're really going to do this? After everything I've sacrificed for you, for this family? Her tone rose, the pitch sharp enough to cut glass. My heart hammered, but I kept my cool. What family, Emily? I asked quietly. The one you risked for an affair with your doctor? The one you lied to, night after night? The one you betrayed in the back seat of a car 2 blocks from our house? She lunged forward, her voice escalating into a full-blown scream. You think you're perfect? You never listened to me. You never understood my needs. She grabbed the papers and shoved them against my chest. You want a divorce? Fine. But don't you dare act like this is all my fault. My throat tightened. You had a choice, I said, forcing the words out. You chose her, and you didn't just hurt me. You hurt Hannah and Jake. I won't let you blame me for your decisions. She hurled the papers onto the floor, pages scattering over the rug. I can't believe you, she spat. She was shaking, furious. For a moment, I saw something behind her eyes, fear, maybe. She realized I wasn't bluffing, that her lies and manipulations had run their course. I left her there, standing in the quiet living room, her rage hanging in the air. Upstairs, I could hear Hannah's muffled sobs and Jake's soft music. Everything was changing, whether Emily accepted it or not. I waited until the next afternoon to tell the kids that I'd actually filed. Hannah came home from her part-time job at a local cafe, looking tired and emotionally drained. Jake was hunched over the kitchen table, picking at a bowl of cereal even though it was nearly dinner time. Emily, presumably still furious, had retreated to our bedroom and closed the door, leaving the rest of us to fend for ourselves in the silence. I cleared my throat, standing in the doorway. "Hey, can we talk for a minute?" I asked, trying to keep my tone gentle. Hannah dragged over a stool, arms folded defensively. Jake looked up from his cereal, eyes uncertain. "I spoke with a lawyer," I said quietly. "I'm going through with a divorce from your mom." The words hung there, heavy as lead. "You both deserve stability, and I can't give you that if I'm trapped in something so broken." Hannah's eyes flared, and for a second, I expected tears or anger. Instead, she narrowed her gaze. "How could you just give up?" she hissed, voice shaking. "You said you'd always be a family." My heart twisted. I knew she'd be upset, but I hadn't expected this kind of resistance. Jake looked between us, confused. "Hannah, we saw how they've been fighting. It's not Dad's fault." Hannah shook her head, tears now slipping down her cheeks. "You're just leaving, Dad. You're packing up," and her voice hitched. "What if we don't want that? What if I want to try and fix it?" I took a step toward her, holding my hands up like I was trying to calm a skittish animal. "Hannah, I know this hurts. I'm sorry you have to go through this. And if there was a way to repair things, I would. But it's not about just me. Your mom, she broke something important." I paused, trying not to reveal too much. The details of Emily's affair weren't for the kids. Not yet. But they had to know this wasn't just a rough patch. Jake chimed in, his voice timid but resolute. "Hannah, maybe we can't fix it. Maybe it's too far gone." He rubbed the back of his neck, eyes full of worry. "They keep yelling when we're not around. I hear Mom crying sometimes, and Dad's not happy either. It's not going to magically get better." Hannah's anger deflated slightly. She looked down, tears dropping onto the floor. "I don't want to lose our family," she whispered. I gently placed a hand on her shoulder. "We're not losing it," I said softly. "It's just going to look different now. I'll always be your dad, and your mom will always be your mom. That doesn't go away. We'll find a new normal." She shook her head, still upset, but I saw the fight leaving her eyes. Jake stood up and nudged her arm. "We can't make them stay together if Mom—" He trailed off, not wanting to finish the thought. "We just can't." Hannah wiped her tears, staring hard at me, as if searching my face for a lie. "If you do this," she said quietly, don't leave us behind." It broke me a little, realizing she thought I might just walk away from them altogether. "Never," I promised, my voice raw. "You and Jake are my priority. Always." I try to keep the house calm, though that word no longer fit our home. Hannah and Jake retreated into a cautious silence. Emily, on the other hand, grew more volatile with each passing day. She'd slam doors, mutter insults under her breath, and stomp around as if daring me to react. The papers lay unsigned on the dining table, a silent dare of their own. I told her I was serious, and I meant it, but she was stalling, maybe out of spite, maybe out of fear. One night, Hannah and Jake were out. Hannah at a friend's study group, Jake at soccer practice. I sat in the living room, flipping aimlessly through channels, trying to ignore the tension humming through the walls. Emily came in, arms crossed, and stood by the TV, blocking my view. "You're really going through with this?" she demanded. Her eyes were puffy, makeup smudged. She looked both furious and desperate. "You're leaving me just like that?" I set the remote down and looked at her evenly. "I gave you a chance to be honest," I said quietly. "You kept lying. I caught you having sex with another person, one you seemed to know well enough to sneak around with for months. You hurt me, you hurt the kids. What's left, Emily?" She opened her mouth, then closed it. Something flickered across her face. Remorse, or maybe fear of losing control. "You think I wanted this?" she said, voice shaking. "I was lonely. You never listened. Stephanie made me feel alive again. God, you don't know what it's like to be stuck with someone who—" I raised a hand, cutting her off. "Don't blame me for your affair. I'm not perfect, but I never threw away our marriage for a cheap thrill." She flinched at my words, then stepped closer. You're a coward. You're just running away instead of trying to fix this. Her voice lowered, became almost pleading. We can fix this. I'll stop seeing Stephanie. We can go to counseling, start over. I felt a knot form in my throat. Part of me wanted to believe her. 20 years is a long time. But I couldn't forget what I'd seen. Her body pressed against Stephanie's, her eyes closed with pleasure, the raw humiliation of catching them in that car. And then her lies, so many lies. No, I said, voice steady. It's too late. She exploded at that, slamming her fist down on the coffee table. You bastard. You think you're righteous, that you're better than me. You just want to humiliate me, turn the kids against me. I stood up, angry now. You turn them against yourself? They're old enough to see what's going on. You think Hannah hasn't noticed how often you leave at odd hours? Jake may be quiet, but he's not stupid. You're doing this to yourself. She started crying, hard, loud sobs that felt like a performance. I walked past her, heading to the kitchen, leaving her to her tears. I didn't know if they were genuine or just another tactic. I didn't care. Every broken dish, every sob, every slammed door only confirmed that I needed to free us from this toxic cycle. It happened just before midnight. I was half dozing on the couch, trying to unwind after another emotionally draining day. Emily was sulking in our bedroom, what used to be our bedroom, while Hannah and Jake slept behind closed doors. The house was unnaturally still, the kind of stillness that puts you on edge, like holding your breath before a scream. A faint knock sounded at the front door. My heart skipped. We weren't expecting anyone, certainly not at this hour. I checked the peephole and felt my skin turn cold. Stephanie stood there, shifting nervously from foot to foot, hair pulled back in a tight ponytail. Her face was pale in the porch light, eyes scanning the dark yard. I hesitated, then opened the door a crack. What do you want? I asked, voice low and firm. Inside, I braced for Emily's reaction if she heard Stephanie's voice. My chest tightened at the thought of more drama, more confrontation. But what choice did I have? Stephanie took a shaky breath. I'm sorry, she said. Her voice was barely above a whisper. I know I shouldn't be here, but I needed to talk to you. I stepped outside onto the porch, shutting the door quietly behind me. The chill night air pressed in, and I folded my arms across my chest. We have nothing to talk about, I said flatly. You know what you did? You helped tear apart my family. She closed her eyes, nodded, and looked genuinely distraught. I know. I'm sorry. I never meant for it to go this far. She looked up, voice quavering. Emily told me you're filing for divorce. And I just wanted you to know, I'm stepping out of it. I'm leaving her alone. This was a mistake. I wanted to laugh, as if her sudden regret fixed anything. It's done, Stephanie, I said. There's no going back. Whether you run off or not, the damage is done. She wiped at her eyes. I know. I never meant to hurt you or the kids. I swear. She told me. She made it sound like you two were practically separated, that you were cold and distant. She paused, swallowing hard. I realize now I only heard her side. I'm sorry. Part of me wanted to tell her how sorry wouldn't cut it, how she had no idea what the last few months had done to me and the kids. But I was so tired of anger, so sick of endless confrontations. There was nothing to gain from yelling at her on my front porch. I nodded curtly, acknowledging her words without forgiving them. Go home, I said quietly. Whatever home is for you. Just leave us alone. She looked at me for a long moment, eyes full of regret, then turned and walked into the darkness. I stood there on the porch, arms still crossed, wondering if this was some final twist of the knife or an olive branch I didn't ask for. Either way, it didn't change my resolve. When I stepped back inside, Emily was waiting at the top of the stairs. She'd heard the murmur of voices and hovered in the shadows like a ghost. I met her eyes, and for once, she looked truly fearful, as if something she prized had slipped through her fingers. I said nothing. I went upstairs, passing her without a glance, heading to the guest room where I'd been sleeping these last weeks. The silence between us now was louder than any fight. The morning sun filtered through the blinds of the guest room, casting thin lines of light across the carpet. I never thought I'd be sleeping here alone, separated by a single hallway from the woman I once loved. My life had splintered into something unrecognizable. But as I lay there, staring at the dust motes drifting lazily in the air, I realized something. This was the first morning in a long time that I felt possible. Change was painful, but it also carried the promise of a future where I could breathe again. I found Hannah and Jake in the kitchen, both silent and grim. Hannah looked exhausted, eyes puffy from crying, but she managed a half-smile when I entered. Jake was hunched over a glass of orange juice, tapping his foot anxiously. I felt my chest tighten. I loved these kids more than life itself, and they deserved better than to watch their parents tear each other apart. I placed a hand on Hannah's shoulder. "I know this isn't what any of us wanted," I said softly, meeting her gaze and then Jake's. "But we'll get through it. You know I'm always here for you, no matter what happens between your mother and me." Hannah nodded, biting her lip, and Jake managed a small, understanding nod. We didn't need to say more. Sometimes the simplest promises were the strongest. Emily didn't appear. I heard her moving upstairs, probably packing or pacing. The divorce paperwork lay waiting. I would file it officially within a day or two, and then the process would begin. Custody arrangements, finances, the slow unwinding of 2 decades of shared life. It wouldn't be easy, but staying in a broken marriage would have cost us all a far greater price. Before leaving for work, I paused at the doorway, taking in the house that was once a home. Family photos on the mantle, Hannah's graduation picture framed proudly, Jake's soccer trophies lined up next to the TV. Evidence of a life built on love and effort. Evidence that, despite the heartbreak, not everything was lost. We still had memories, still had the bonds that no single betrayal could entirely erase. Reflecting on it all, I learned that love isn't just passion and warmth. It's also honesty, respect, and trust. Without those, what remains is hollow. I'd been blind, or maybe just hopeful, clinging to what we once had rather than facing what we'd become. But I see clearly now. I understand that no one should settle for being lied to, manipulated, or betrayed. Healing would take time, therapy, difficult conversations, and adjustments, but I would find my footing. We all would. If I could give advice to anyone reading this, I'd say, trust your instincts. Don't ignore the signs because it's easier to pretend. Love deeply, but never at the expense of your own dignity and peace of mind. Sometimes, walking away is the bravest, most loving thing you can do for yourself and for those you cherish most.